On the podcast today, we are going to speak about the friendship first philosophy we find in the East that has the potential to save the world from a lot of disagreement and conflict. Now, I've called this in the past the art of no debate, and I've wrote articles and made videos about this before. And Guy-Young and I will go into depth about this. And this is essentially a part of Eastern thought, which is to avoid debate at all costs in some sense, and to keep friendship first. And we find this still, especially in countries such as Japan. But this mentality is difficult for Westerners to understand because Westerners are often encouraged to engage in debate, in disagreement, and in conflict.
Yes.
Based on individualism.
Yeah, I guess it's for a Westerner, it's hard to understand because this friendship first idea comes in even the territory of business as well.
Yep.
Whereas where in the West, I guess in the business relationship is really purely business.
Business, yeah.
As in like very self-interested somewhat, and also profit-based. Yep. So make sure you keep the contract alive, and you make sure you keep the contract when you follow by it, like nothing else.
Nothing else, yeah.
Yeah. But whereas in the East it's very different because they allow other human factors to come to place as well, because they almost acknowledging there are things that sometimes go wrong without anyone's expectation.
Yeah.
So that bringing the friendship first and any relationship first, that idea actually creates a stronger bond in the business relationship as well.
Exactly. And we'll mention more about contracts later, but to understand exactly what you're talking about so people can get a greater understanding of this in the podcast is that you have to fundamentally understand that there's two fundamental cognitive styles in the world. There's the Eastern cognitive style and the Western cognitive style. Now, this idea that the West have that there's one universal way of thinking is completely false. And there's been extensive studies of this, and we know this. You're an Easterner, I'm a Westerner. There has been cultural differences, and even in our relationship, but we've reconciled all of those over the years we've been married and whatnot. And people do reconcile these, as what you said, with the friendship first philosophy.
Yes.
But to get deeper into it, to understand these two different cognitive styles, both Easterners and Westerners develop differently due to environmental factors. So in the West, you had cultures coming out of Greece. Greece was kind of like the heart of Western thought or Western cognition. And in Greece, you had, due to the environment, people had more individualistic activities. And
yes, I mean, they were doing mainly fishing, which you don't need a big, large community. It's more individualistic way to get food. Yeah. And also wheat cultivation is not like a rice cultivation. You don't need a lot of labor.
Hunting.
Yeah, and hunting, yes. So that sort of natural environment factors as well.
Yeah, of course. And so that helped develop an individualistic perspective of the world, which in Europe actually influenced their religions, the way that they understand and the way that they crafted their religions, their philosophies, and their actual general worldview. And that's in this part of the brain, in the prefrontal cortex. So, which is what we in cognitive science we would call cold cognition. So these are the cognitive control centers. So when you're very individualistic, you're applying the cognitive control centers because you're trying to control your environment.
Yes.
And that's not a bad thing. We're not saying that it's a bad thing because there are two cognitive styles. And two different cultures around the world developed applying more of that one of the other, right? So as you were mentioning in the East, in China and India, who both are the heart of Eastern culture, rice cultivation was big. And so when you have rice cultivation, you need large amounts of people. And so you had a very community-based society, which then their focus then is on the ethics of community and divinity.
Yes.
As opposed to the ethics of autonomy, which is with individualism. And so then you have reflected into the Eastern culture the philosophies and the religions that they have. So you have Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism, which are all holistic traditions.
Yes.
And so they have a holistic worldview. And so, which is related to the hot cognition. So all of these unconscious regions of the brain, the intuitive parts of ourself, I can open and close my hands and so forth and so on. So the very naturalistic perspective. And so in the West, they had the analytic. In this part, you're applying more of the analytic perspective. And so hence, in Europe, science became
Yes.
it was born due to the analytical mind. But then over in the East, you had a lot of spiritual traditions, community-based societies. And so, like I said, there's no difference there. We need both parts of the mind.
Yes.
But the thing is, and some Westerners may get annoyed at me saying this, but the natural part of our cognition is the holistic cognition. We're only supposed to employ the analytical part of our mind conservatively.
Yes.
So and a lot of Westerners get mad at that because their whole culture coming from Europe was built on rational thought. Not always. Let's say in the last 300 years, right? So.
Yeah, well, that's the actually beginning of the problem once you start employing only one side of cognition, isn't it?
Yep.
So things can become overly analytical or things can become overly intuition-based.
Yes.
Right? So we need to be able to apply these two different cognition conservatively and correctly and appropriately on a right circumstance, a right situation.
Yeah. And it relates to Taoism, like the concept of yin and yang, right? So like in the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu says, know the yang or know the masculine, but embrace the yin or the feminine, meaning the holistic natural part of yourself, which is just comfortable, being itself and not in activity all the time.
Yes.
And apply yang only a little bit when needed, right? So that's the nature of how our mind actually functions.
Sometimes people say when people need to make a kind of big decision, you need to trust your gut feeling.
Yeah.
Again, that gut feeling is from that cognitive area.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about. That strong intuitive sense that sometimes that we need to actually respect.
Of course. And I don't think a lot of people do respect it these days, but that's actually the naturalness we have deep inside of us.
Yes.
And so what you have in the modern world is you have this over-analytical generation of people developing that are ignoring the naturalness of themselves, or in some sense trying to suppress the naturalness of themselves.
Yes.
And we see this is becoming very popular in the modern day.
And also, I just wanted to mention, even in language difference, that we can see this as well, because in a lot of Western languages, including English and some European languages, are basically based on very linear term, right? Because it's always the subject comes first. So that is to show again how individualistic the languages themselves are actually, whereas a lot of Asian languages are actually, as you know best, that we explain like the circumstance or situation first, and then what happened comes after.
Yes.
So it's always about kind of the whole landscape of what you're trying to explain comes in first in the language.
Yes.
The structure of language is like that. So that's how Easterners communicate. I think that's why sometimes some situation happens that lost in translation a little bit. Yeah, there's a difference in a language that's coming from the difference of culture.
Yeah, that's a great point, because that pinpoints two characteristic differences between the West and the East, right? Cognitively, like we talked about the analytical mind and the holistic mind, where in the West, the hallmark of Western thought is categories and objects.
Yes.
So the mind categorizes and sees it and has an objectified view of the world, right? Whereas the East is focused on context and relationships. As you said, like when in language, it's all about context. And I've seen personally people say to a Chinese person, hurry up and get to the point, because the way that they speak English is still infused with how they think in Chinese.
Yes.
So they start explaining everything else but the point of what they're trying to get to. But actually in Chinese it makes sense because everyone's cognitive style is like that. And that's actually how the language has developed, as you mentioned. It's a roundabout language.
Yes,
it's not like a directional linear. It's a non-linear language. It's more natural. So you speak about context and relationships, and we explained this on a previous podcast, as we said, when someone asks someone, can you tell me who you are? And so if you ask someone in the West, if you say, who are you? They'll explain their job and everything like this, everything about themselves. But if you ask an Easterner, they'll talk about their mum and dad, their grandma and grandpa, the community they're from. It's built more on a holistic perspective.
Yeah, because their identity is based on the people around them.
Yes.
Yeah, that's how they identify themselves.
Yes.
So that's first thing that we say. My parents are doing this sort of jobs, and I have how many siblings and this and that sort of thing. So that those sort of relational aspect comes in first when they identify themselves as to explain who they are. Yeah. Exactly.
And one of the big things in the world today and even I struggle with this, as you know, like I say, for example, I post something online, right? Like on one of the social media networks. And so like, I just post things that are interesting to me apart from my work, right? And so I'll post something, and then this is all Westerners, mind you, no Easterners have this problem, but the Westerner has a view of you of a category. Like they've put you in a box, they've pigeonholed you, like you're on the shelf and you should only be like this. They don't understand that individuals are nuanced. You see, the East understand individuals are nuanced. They have nuance, right? And that's the whole point of Taoism, Buddhism, and Hinduism, is that the ego is not a solid state. I mean, the person naturally is not a solid state.
No.
It doesn't have form.
Yes.
So it doesn't have a category and object. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And I find this really strange because like I'll post things online and then I get a lot of blowback from Westerners who think that I should just be about this topic and that's it, without understanding that, hey, that's an individual too. They have nuance and they have, they have flavor, they have color, they are in the motion of change with the universe. It's a really strange way of thinking, right? And the problem particularly in America, I'm finding is, and I get this because we have a large American audience, is they can't get outside of that way of thinking or that way of seeing. And so what you have in America is you have a bunch of people disagreeing with each other because they've pigeonholed everyone. They've put them into a category. Oh, he is like this and that. Oh, so he must be a right-wing person or a left-wing person. And they completely forget about nuance. We're not like a book subject. You know what I mean? Humans are not like a book subject. We are complicated creatures. And so the East appreciate the complexity of a human being. And that's why they embrace, because of holism, context and relationships. And a lot of people get frustrated with me. I've had this on live streams where they'll ask me a question which is very linear and just has like one sort of point to it. And I will say to them, I need more context because it's hard to actually answer something that is linear about someone you've never met. So I don't know their character. I don't know like their tendencies. It's impossible for me to give an accurate answer.
Yes.
So, and this is becoming a big problem because especially everyone outside of, say, the Western world, or let's say America, for example, who don't have that cognitive style, have to deal with those people superimposing that cognitive style on cultures that don't have that cognitive style.
Yes.
It's really frustrating.
Yeah, yes, it is very frustrating. That's, I think, there are many problems of just following Western cognitive styles, but that is one of the big problems, I think. They sometimes, like in some sort of cultural shell, they live in that shell, they can only see the world from that perspective, and they can't break out of that shell. And that is I think, Western individualism at worst, at a very extreme level, that sort of a problem occurs. And when you only be able to see that sort of cultural isolation, that what happens is that there is a misguiding of certain information. And that misguiding information causes unnecessary conflicts. And that's what's exactly happening around the world. That extreme Western individualism, actually, it is a Western culture because it came from the West, but nowadays it is happening in the East Asian countries as well, that this individualistic culture comes to your territory and you overly identify with that way of thinking. And completely discarding, like you said, context and in terms of what are you talking about. This kind of inquiring the question instead of just head first jumping onto whatever topic it is and make a quick judgment. That's happening around the world, whether you're Asians or Westerners nowadays. And that sort of misguiding and misleading of a certain information only creates more misunderstanding, and that misunderstanding creates more conflict. Whereas if you did understand correctly at the first place, that conflict didn't have to happen at all, right? It's so unnecessary exercise. Unnecessarily, we spend so much energy into just this, again, unnecessary argument and debate over something based on complete misunderstanding.
Exactly. Well, the Easterner would not even make a comment or not engage. Like if it was something that they didn't have total understanding, or even if they disagreed with it, there wouldn't be a tendency cognitively to go, oh, I'm going to prove my point here. Now that has developed a little bit in the East, but like naturally it wasn't like that, let's say 100 years ago. Particularly, I mean, you know, we'll use Japan as a big example during this podcast, but the Japanese are generally don't have those inclinations. They just will see a post. If they personally disagree on an individual level, there's nothing for them to say about it. Yes. But, you know, with those Westerners, they got to wield their opinion. They got to cancel you. They got to shut you down so you fall in line with their way of thinking. It is a sense of insecurity. Yes. You see? And this is why the Eastern view is a grown-up view, and the Western view, in some sense, is a little bit immature. Yes. Because there's a sense of insecurity. Yes. There is that insecurity that people don't... See, in the West, people, they think that we should all think the same, right? Where the East has understood from the get-go that people think differently. And we need to actually respect that. Yes. You need to be secure in the fact that all people around the world all think differently. Even within one culture, people think differently. Exactly. Are you comfortable with that? Are you secure enough in your own being to appreciate and acknowledge that? That's where we have to get to in a sense of maturity. Yes. And so that's kind of a good segue to what you were originally talking about with contracts, right? So the difference between contracts between West and East, as you said, like the Western contract is solid, it's in concrete, right? Where in the East, a contract is a tentatively agreed upon guide for the future. Yeah. That's what it is. So that's how it is, right? That's what it actually is. So you and I are in a contract, but it's like, well, if trouble occurs, then we can kind of...
Yeah, find a way out to solve the problem.
Exactly, exactly. And so we'll talk about one example, right? Like, say this example was between Japan and Australia. And the prices of sugar dropped dramatically in the world. And so Japan and Australia had this agreement with sugar distribution. You know, Australia produces lots of sugar, right? And so what happened was, because of the drop in the world market, Australia refused to negotiate the price, So they refused to negotiate the price of sugar. And their view, and so from the Japanese perspective, because of friendship first, they were of the opinion that, of course, you'll help us out here,
Yeah.
You'll help us out in this thing. But Australia were like, no, but we have a contract in place. And from the Australian perspective, they thought that the Japanese were purely self-serving and self-interested. But this is not the case, actually, because in Japan, this is actually how business operates inside Japan between customer and supplier. And there's one famous example is the movie industry in Japan, where so when it snows in Tokyo, for example, and it can snow and snow. And so the theatre owners struggle immensely through these very cold periods because the drop-in audience actually goes dramatically down. And the amazing thing actually is between the film distributors and the theatre owners is that the film distributors will compensate the theatre owners during that period of time.
Yeah.
Because there's an understanding that, as you mentioned, if we have kind of this loose guide for the future, it'll strengthen the bonds we have between customer and supplier.
Yes.
And that's actually what's good for business long term. But the West can't understand that because the West don't think it's cost effective to alter a contract.
Yes.
And you could say there's probably some point there, right? But if you're thinking in a long-term basis,
Yes.
you're not thinking with friendship first. If you think with friendship first, well, we could have a long-term commitment from Japan here. But if we break that friendship, if the Japanese think they can't trust Australians, they can just go to Brazil. They lose business. So it's not a long-term. It's not a good long-term strategy.
Yes. In that story, I see that how the Japanese side has such value on loyalty. Because even the loyalty comes into place in even the business landscape. Their interest is, of course, business, but they think of long-term relationship because they understand that landscape of very industry, I think. That's why they want to keep the relationship strong so that business bond becomes strong as well.
Yes.
And in that relationship-wise, there is a certain level of trust and loyalty, being loyal to each other. Whereas the Australian side of story will create too much of a burnt bridges, basically, right? Because it's just purely profit-based.
Yep.
The way they think of the business, what business should be, right? So that you need to follow the contract no matter what happens in the industry and this and that. If you don't follow, well, you broke the contract. I'm gonna look for someone else. This is the logic from them, right?
Yeah.
So there is no such thing as trust, loyalty,
No.
and thinking of long-term relationship. That creates too much of a burnt bridges. And I see that actually in a personal level as well, how people are nowadays. They don't have loyalty between relationship, in the relationship and even in the friendship, so that there's so many burnt friendship and relationship.
Just getting torched every day.
Yeah, that's why in the end, what remains just you just isolate yourself.
Yeah.
So that you too many burnt relationships around an individual, and then an individual just becomes so isolated. So that's what I think what we see nowadays a lot, that how people don't have real true friendship and relationship, and people actually find it very difficult to find a partner for life nowadays.
And because of that, there's a lot of people who suffer from anxiety and stress
100%.
because they live in a world where they feel like they don't belong.
Yes.
Which we'll talk about later.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to mention before we move on is that it's ironic, as you were mentioning, how Australia was, with their behaviour with the contract, and how they were pointing the finger at Japan, saying that they were self-serving and self-interested. But who really is self-serving and self-interested? With and from when you've come at it from a friendship first basis, the Australian side was self-serving and
Yes.
self-interested.
Yes.
Now, sticking with business, loyalty, and trust, a lot of people may know this, but when you do business with Chinese business people, they have a really good strategy, the Chinese, and it's in how to do business, right? So when you go to have a business agreement with a Chinese person, you might fly to China, for example, and then you get in China, and then you think you're going to talk strategy, or you're going to talk about this new deal that you have with them, and you think that this, and then as soon as you get off the plane, it's like, let's head to the bar, and it's like, what the hell? Is this kosher? And so then you go to the bar, and then the strategy here is that the Chinese use this approach because what happens is it disarms your ego. When you start having alcohol and you start to downregulate this analytical part of the brain, and they know Westerners are overly analytical.
Mm-hmm.
So they need to disarm this. And so alcohol disarms that. And then what happens when you disarm that, you see the nature of the person,
Yes.
which is the hot cognition, the holistic side of themselves. And so, and let me tell you, you better get your liver ready because you get legless drunk with these these deals.
Especially with the Chinese alcohol, it's up to like 60%.
60%. You are flat on your face. But this is a really good strategy because why they do it is they want to see if they can trust you. Now, they're not saying that the deal isn't important. But what's more important to them is loyalty and trust.
Yes.
They want to know that they can trust you going forward. So it's based on friendship first. If they can't trust you going forward, they just don't do the deal with you. Even if the deal is exceptional deal, they will just go, well, look, we'll go with the other guy because he was a nice guy, and we could have a drink together and he didn't get mad at us and so forth and so on. So. And this is how you actually develop deeper bonds.
Yes.
This is why a lot of people probably know this because I'm assuming a lot of people listening and watching have had alcohol before and have been drunk possibly, is that if you go out drinking, say if you go out drinking with a new work colleague, after that night, there's a deeper bond between. It's a strange thing, right? Because what's happened is you've let your guard down, you've disarmed your ego, and then nature and nature come together, and what happens there? It's always friendship first.
Yes.
It's everyone's good, everyone's happy. A lot of people say, how come I can't have that feeling when I'm drunk all the time? And it's like you can, but you need to learn how to meditate properly. You need to learn how to downregulate the analytical part of yourself, which allows your nature to shine forth. And so this trust and loyalty perspective of the friendship first philosophy is very important in all aspects of life, actually.
Even that story just kind of remind me of some of the Hollywood actors talking about their own kind of story and got to their own success. Like the story of Kevin Hart, it just kind of came to me. Like when in his career, like when everything went to toilet bowl is when he had a wrong friendship and relationship around himself. When he was kind of slowly going up to the stardom level, the people who were around him was more so to take advantage of him, and of course they being really nice in front of him, but they had other ulterior motive. Why? Then he became having a bad relationship with the managers and this and that. Obviously, their relationship fell apart over time, and that's why what he was saying in the interview, I think it was in a conversation, was saying that it's important to keep your circle small, who you can trust. Mm-hmm. That's the secret and key to success. I think that's applied to any other entrepreneurs or business people and that category as well, like the people who became successful. They had always people working together so close, and there's someone that you can trust as a business partner. That's why always close friends or in between the family, they do the work together. So that leads to the success.
Well, Kevin's story is a little bit sad, and it highlights the negative side of the Western cognitive style, right? So because everyone's individualistic and self-interested, he had to behave like that.
Yeah.
He had to make his circle small.
Yeah.
He learned the hard way
Yes.
that he couldn't trust these people who came out of the woodwork, and everyone's your friend when you start making money, right?
Yes.
Everyone becomes your friend. You haven't seen a guy for like 30 years and he's like, hey, what's happening? And like your long lost father just appears. It's like, hey, Dad, what are you doing here? I haven't seen you since, well, I've never met you. And so, you know, everyone comes out of the woodwork.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of sad, because from an
Yeah,
Eastern
it is,
perspective,
yeah.
they would say, what, you can't trust just everyone?
Yeah.
Everyone's just not loyal?
Yeah.
They act like that? I mean, as you know, in Japan, the Japanese in general, like if you get outside, particularly if you get outside of Tokyo, I mean, they wouldn't understand that story you said. They'd be like, what do you mean he couldn't trust certain people? We can trust everyone in the community here.
Yes,
You know
yes.
why? Because they belong in the community. See, this is the thing with the holistic cognition. You belong. When you trust, and that trust is actually reciprocal between each and every person, you belong, right? But when you live in an individualistic society, as you were mentioning before, you start these bridges just start burning left, right, and center. Like there's bushfires going on all around you, and then next minute there's just you, and you live in this little shell. So you have a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, and you have that, and they arise from that deep feeling of not belonging. You know, and this is a problem in the West. This is why mental illness is so bad in the West. Society's not cohesive. You know, it's not cohesive. Like whereas if you look in societies that operate from the ethics of community and divinity, there's a social cohesion.
Yes.
But like if you look in the West, there's particularly now, and I shouldn't say all Western countries, right? Like if we look at Eastern Europe, there's a lot of social cohesion.
Yes.
And actually, ironically, in Eastern Europe, there's a lot more sanity going on at the moment than there is in Western European countries. Which, if you said 50 years ago, you'd go, "What are you talking about?" But the tides have turned, and so that's what happens, right? So, like in the friendship first psychology of Asian countries, there is a sense of belonging, because you're not all necessarily on the same page, but you operate from the perspective is that you don't want to hurt this person. You don't want to harm them with your words or with your fists.
Yes.
You want them just to be as happy as possible. So you're not going to go online and disagree with someone's post, you know. And so from a Western perspective, that doesn't make sense. It's like, yeah, but we should debate. And what if his idea is wrong? And it's like, it doesn't matter.
True.
Like if you go into a Japanese boardroom or you go into a Japanese or a council, right? If someone has a disagreement, they usually will hold that back, particularly if everyone else is sort of on the same page. And a lot of these boardroom meetings in Japan are actually kind of, it's already organized before they go on the boardroom, what's actually going to happen. And, you know, and so you could say, well, what if the superior is not right? And it's like, well, the Japanese just don't see it like a Westerner. And you have to learn that. You have to understand that what they're talking about is more about the harmony of the group.
Yes.
And, you know, even if there's one person who has that disagreement, they will just withdraw that concern. You know, or if they raise it, they'll raise it in more of the spirit of friendliness, as opposed to disagreeing with the superior of the group.
Yeah, well, that's right. It's working as a one unit.
Yes.
That's the thing, I think. That's why even if in a board meeting they made the wrong decision, and so when the problem occurs, that also they also come as a unit. And try to solve the problem, not instead of blaming and put the fingering out to a certain individual, right? That's not how they solve the problem either.
No.
Once you are in a unit together, then you go together no matter what, really.
Exactly. And so when you look at rates of mental health issues and illnesses in the world, where are they primarily? They're primarily in individualistic countries and developing countries such as Korea, with its high rates of suicide, because the individualistic consciousness has come into Korea and is pressing up against the holistic cognition.
Which isn't natural to Korean people's DNA.
No, of course not.
Yeah,
of course not. Your cognitive style is holistic.
Exactly. Naturally, they aren't like that.
No.
But because this imported the concept of individualism, it just kind of came whole in at once, just got thrown into those people, so they don't know how to take it, and they didn't understand what was happening within themselves, and also socially, I don't think they know how to deal with these problems, psychological problem in a large population. Actually, it's getting more and more, so that they just kind of ending up killing themselves.
Yeah, it's sad, really sad. It's really sad. But it all comes down to not belonging, man. It's that feeling of not belonging. You're not part of something. If you look at India, for example, right? Everyone, when people go to India and they say it just transforms their life, it's because you're out of cultures that operate from the ethic of autonomy.
Yes.
And you go into these countries that operate from the ethic of community and divinity. And even if you have different color skin, different color hair, different color eyes, whatnot, in India you're embraced.
Yes.
Because they don't have concepts of like racism and stuff like that in that country. Because the foundation of Hinduism is so solidified in those countries that they know that as a visitor, and this is a term in India, guest is God. And so that's why you and I, when we're just walking down the road, a random person pulls up on a push bike and says, "Do you want to come around for dinner tonight?" And you're like, you don't know the person from a bar of soap, but it's like, sure, why not? And you go and have a great home-cooked meal, and you make, and again, you solidify bonds because of the friendship first philosophy.
Yes.
And so when people go to India, because majority of India is particularly Hindu, everyone's operating sort of from the same cognitive state. Even the Swadeshi Muslims are Indian in their DNA.
Yeah, although they're Muslim, they somewhat identify with being Hindu as well.
Of course,
that quality.
That's why they have sort of their own form of Islam.
Yes,
it's kind of different to what you find in the Middle East, and so like there's such a bond because of this friendship first philosophy, and that's not to say that you don't overgeneralize that, because we're talking from primarily what the cognitive state is. Of course, people have disagreements in that in all countries and have fights. We all know that. You don't have to point out the obvious, but generally they're operating from this perspective.
Yes.
And the West. I know that the West usually typically don't want to learn from indigenous cultures or the East and this and that, but this is something that they can learn from those types of cultures about this friendship first philosophy, which is actually like, imagine if this was promoted in America right at the minute. You could transform the whole country. Instead of going out and arguing about your stupid political opinion, why not just go and look in that person in the eye and say, how are you today? Like, it's a good day, isn't it? Go back to the basics of what life is about.
Yes.
Like, it's good, it's a nice sunny day, isn't it? Want to go and have a coffee or something, like bring it back to the human level.
Exactly.
Stop with this cleverness of having your overly exaggerated opinion and trying to get people to believe in that. That's a sign of insecurity.
Yeah, 100%.
Go out there and just be a friend to the world. It's not hard, is it?
Yeah, exactly.
It's not hard.
Again, like as you mentioned, this Westerners' ego sometimes gets in the way for the better, but it's kind of becomes inevitable to learn from the Eastern traditions and philosophy now, because I think the way the world is now is resulted from the extreme Western culture, Western individualistic culture, and that only got us to such divisive society, and that divisive society just driving humanity insane, really. It's too much schism in the world right
100%,
now.
100%.
So if we keep driving that way, what would be the end, really?
What is their end goal?
People? Really, like, what do they really want from now,
They're insecure and they want people to all think as they do.
No, but like this thing that I got it out of your that very out of no debate article. Yes, you're saying like, how can an individual opinion be best for everyone if it is self-interested?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's pretty obvious. So, I mean, this is kind of common sense, isn't it? Like, it's not too much paradox and irony within their own argument there.
Yeah.
Like, what do you really want if you don't want to learn from other cultures and philosophy and traditions, which definitely can get out of this bloody pool hole, the situation of whole, madness, right?
Yeah.
And again, that such divisive society that we have right now is actually getting justified back by Western individualistic culture, ironically.
Yes.
Right? And then culture kind of becoming more political.
Yeah.
And then being culture become political, that obviously leads to the lack of creativity. And then there is no freedom of expression anymore,
No.
right? There is no real sense to the real true sense of art anymore.
No.
The death of creativity.
Well, that's what political correctness has done, isn't it? It's killed art, it's killed creativity. People say, why is there no great musicians anymore and this and that? But it's because, it's the culture, as you were mentioning, this politically oriented culture is killing.
Yes.
It's just killing it all, And we often get asked, and I get asked a lot on the channel, like, why do you say certain things about, like certain things and this and that? It's because I'm not going to tend to your psychosis. I have no interest in tending to your psychosis. The whole point of the channel is to speak about Eastern philosophy, but also speak about it in the modern context as well, and infuse it with sometimes, not most of the time, modern problems.
Yes.
And so there is this kind of mass psychosis at the moment where I think a large portion of the people, not the majority, but there's a large portion of people who are mentally ill, and they don't even know they're mentally ill.
Yes.
And it comes from isolating themselves in their own worldviews and their own subjectivity, as you mentioned with that quote that I said. So they're going around with their self-interested perspective, their own personal agenda, trying to superimpose that onto the world. And when they invariably find people who don't resonate with that perspective, that's when the mental health illness begins in them, because then they build
They
their
fight.
They fight. They're always in protection and always in like attack mode. So there's an ebb and flow between protection and attack, right? Being active out there, going and wielding your view on people, but also protecting your view. And so you're always in a fight or flight perspective, and you can only develop a mental health illness because you think you don't belong to the world. The problem is not that other people disagree with you. It's that you hold so dearly your beliefs. You got to let your beliefs go. And maybe your beliefs aren't so cool as what you think. There's a lot of these mind pathogens out there in the world these days that actually try to circumvent the way nature actually is. And so we know, everyone knows intuitively, there's a natural way to the world, right? But a lot of these mind pathogens are trying to destroy these natural ways of the world, which lacks common sense, and people actually are cottoning onto this, and they're saying, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm not going to tend to your psychosis.
Right.
And so a lot of these mind pathogens that are out there, the real sad thing is that's what happened in the US, is the media organizations and the governments are tending to these psychopathic tendencies. But the majority of Americans don't resonate with this stuff.
Yes.
And they're pushing it onto the American public, but they don't resonate with it because these are forms of psychosis.
Yes.
These mind pathogens are growing in impressionable minds and developing psychoses within them. Because they then, once they believe in this crap that's been churned out there by the media and the government, then they think they don't belong. Yeah. But they do belong. They do belong. We all belong to the world. We belong to the universe. Once you have too much crap in your mind, then you start to dissociate yourself from each and every one around you.
Again, the overly activating this cold cognitive part that creates, the too much of analytical and categorical mind that isolates us only. That's going to cause us more problem. That mass psychosis. That's what's really happening.
Yeah, and people, they get frustrated when you're not angry and sad with them. When you're happy and you're okay to live your life, and you understand that you have nuance, and you're okay to post whatever you want and live the way you want in happiness and in freedom, they don't like that.
Yeah, they unfortunately,
they don't want the best for you.
Yeah,
but that's what it is. They don't want the best for you, right?
Yeah, you become alienated by them.
Yeah. So, but isn't that ironic? So that really shows their psychosis. And so for you and I, and probably for most of the people listening and watching, we have no interest in tending to people's psychosis. We want them to be free, and we want them to understand themselves. Because only through understanding yourself can lead to more and more people in the world being free and peaceful, and following this friendship first philosophy, as opposed to arguing about the most frivolous things.
Again, those arguments and conflicts are so unnecessary. They completely miss the point argument, really.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's so true. And the thing is that the fabric of opinion itself is built on individual conditioning. So, and this is what forms a personal agenda.
Yes.
And this is why Eastern spirituality is so important, because when you're working on the deeper layers, you're starting to thin out the individual conditioning. And then you won't have so many opinions and agendas. And this is why I really find it funny, like on my social networks, when I have individuals who will get so mad about like a quote or this and that, but they say that they're on the path, but then they get so mad and this and that. And so that's the evidence that they're not really on the path.
Yes.
So, for example, a friendship first philosophy is like, primarily, if you were to say something, you would just be supportive. You wouldn't say anything. Oh, you wouldn't say
if you disagree.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
You wouldn't. Why do you have to say something?
Yeah. Because you understand life at a deeper level, right?
Yeah, exactly. What triggered you to be a keyboard assassin, really? Get this in there.
Yeah, right. Get this, yeah. This will teach him. And it's like, I don't even know who you are. Like, okay, whatever. So the difference here is that, like, if we take a friendship first philosophy, is that we're looking at collective harmony over the self-interested ego,
that's
right?
Mm-hmm.
And don't superimpose, this is a problem with the internet now, right? You say something and everyone exaggerates what it says. We're not talking about communism and this and that. We're talking about collective humanity here, community. So don't twist words. This is a stupid thing I find on the internet. So collective harmony over the self-interested ego. And we see this in the East, right? We see, because of the holistic cognition, like if we, I always go back to India, if we look at the Dharmic culture, right? The Dharmic culture is built on a collective model. Confucianism is actually built on a collective model.
Yes.
Obviously Taoism as well.
Yes.
And so you don't see a lot of self-interest and this and that. Sure, we can say that there can be certain people in positions of power who can manipulate people. This can be the problem with that, but it's a problem with the individualistic cognition as well. There's always pitfalls within.
Of course.
And there's always people who are too overly clever.
Yes.
And it's up to the population to go, hey, wait up, I think that guy's taking us for a ride here.
Yeah.
So you don't want to overgeneralize that.
No.
Because there will be some people who will try to take advantage of people.
Yeah.
But not all people.
Yes.
We were talking before the podcast, we were talking about Korea, for example, how generally there still is the friendship first philosophy.
Yeah, it's still there. I mean, still primarily I would say that friendship-based society is still now. It's just shaped differently, a little bit molded different way, and sometimes that relationship gets used to cheat on someone. And like, for example, in this story, it happens so common in Korea. Like this real estate agent come to somebody just shopping, just really like talking up about this piece of property and this and that. And that individual really trusted, again, relationship. Oh, this person is really nice person, is trying to show me a nicer piece of real estate property and this and that. So like give like large chunk of money, and the person kind of the agent disappears, kind of thing. So that's sort of it's overly relationship based. So somewhat like naive and kind of innocent sort of motivation there, right? Like a reason you really trusted that person. The person is showing you the right information, and then you give them lots of money, and you end up losing all money. And it happens a lot. Again, that is kind of the other side of coin, isn't it? That friendship based, again, like friendship based relationship being used in the capitalistic world. I think that's what it is.
That's what that is. Yeah, but I guess it's like I think that. I can only speak for myself. I can't speak for any other Westerner, and maybe this is because I've lived in the East for so long and a lot of spiritual practice. I do this. This is what I do. Is that I often operate from the trust first, friendship first perspective. Yeah. And of course, I get let down when someone breaks that trust, right? Like, and I think, well, why did that person do that? And sometimes I think maybe I shouldn't trust, but then still the the operating system still trusts, right? And I think that's probably the same for all of us. We all trust naturally, and we all are loyal deep down, and we all want to be friends deep down. But then when those sorts of clever people come along and break that friendship and that trust, then we start to be skeptical of other people. And then we start to like confuse past experiences with present experiences and this and that. Now, I don't do that anymore. I did that when I was younger, but I don't do that anymore. I still trust everyone from the get-go. Yeah. But obviously, there's always going to be times where people break that trust. And look, that's just that's life, right? That's being a human.
Yes.
So... But I think that deep down we have that operating system. And I think if we lean more into it, if each and every one of us lean more into it, then we can start building really strong bonds with each other. Instead of looking at the so-called differences in air quotes, which are actually only accumulative knowledge you've acquired through your existence that's become your ego in air quotes. If you get rid of a lot of that, then you start to operate from this real friendship first philosophy. And I mean, you can love people more purely. You can really have a warm heart to people even outside of your family.
Exactly.
See how, like, it's particularly in the West, everything is like, we only love our family, you know, and I'm just protecting this family, and anyone else in the community is a threat to what my family is. And so I have to protect them at all costs, and I don't trust anyone in this community.
There's too much fear in it.
Too much fear. Whereas if you go into the East and you go into a community, I mean, it's changing now, but like let's say in older times, the people in the neighborhood are not more important than your family, but they're as important in the sense that the community holds the glue of the society together.
Yeah, there is this custom in Korea that, like, if you just moved into apartment unit or in a house in a suburb, that you just get like you order lots of rice cakes, like a sweet rice cakes, a traditional kind of snack in Korea, and you pack in a nice bag or something, and you give to all the close neighborhood. That's the kind of custom. Like, I'm new neighborhood, I just moved in, and let's just, if we see each other, we just say hello, and like that's kind of a custom, like in Korea. Again, it's very died out now, but still some people are doing it. I've seen, still people are doing it, which is really beautiful to see, actually. And you'll be pretty surprised at how many really people in your neighborhood are really actually friendly and really lovely people, really welcoming. They really appreciate your gesture. And next time around, they get to see each other in the elevator or something, and they say hello, and like they naturally become friends, Yeah. That's why naturally you build that bond and trust with one another. And you just there's that relationship there that you're no longer just isolated, living in this house or unit block, and you don't know anyone, and like that, like how it is in the West, really. You don't even know who's living the next door.
We don't know our neighbours.
Yeah,
never seen our neighbours. We don't know who they are.
Yeah.
It's really sad, because I remember when I was younger, there was a little bit of that in the West, right? And my mum, she was old school, right? So like we would get a new neighbour, and we lived in the house, and so in the countryside, and so, I mean, it wasn't countryside, I mean out of town a bit, and she would bake like just a simple cake, take it over, welcome them, and and it builds a bond. But I noticed over the years it stopped. Because I don't know if people were so receptive to this gesture, and people are kind of like, why do you want to know me? This becomes the thing in the West, right? Like, why do you want to know me? What's your angle here? Why are you talking to me? There's always people that live in so much fear. They think there's always an angle, or like you're trying to get something from them, instead of just like, hey man, I'm just a friendly gesture. Just take it easy, like.
Yeah, that's what I sometimes find it actually with myself, that I when I get to see new people, to say hello and how was their weekend, and just ask, saying hello basically.
Yeah, for sure.
And the reaction is always a little bit cold and hesitant, and that's a little bit underlying of why you want to know these things about me, kind of thing. I feel really kind of they are very standoffish.
Yeah.
And I feel really like, I feel somewhat rejected. I feel a little bit hurtful somewhat.
Yeah.
But I feel, a little bit, sad. It's sad, isn't it? That there is no longer even that sort of trust to say, even to greet each other, really.
Yeah. The sad thing is that particularly and people probably listening and watching will sympathize with this and probably have experienced this, and we've experienced this too, is that when you're kind of on the spiritual path, or let's say you are a highly intelligent person, when this happens, right, when you make gestures and this and that, and people don't or are always skeptical of what your actions are, you begin to withdraw from society. This is a real sad thing, right? So it's almost like you fall into the hands of the individualistic psychology, because in some sense it's a safe strategy too, because you're just well, these people don't care to even respond to me.
No.
So why would I even ask how they are and this and that? So you begin to withdraw, and that is a good and that is a reasonable strategy, because if no one gives two hoots about you caring about what they're doing, they're skeptical of you asking questions, you might as well just mind your own business and just get on with your own life, you know. Yeah. And until you can move somewhere else in the East where you can be like that, and that's all well and good. Yeah. But until that time, it's best, if you're in the West, to probably, especially if you're a spiritual or a highly intelligent person, is to kind of,
it's somewhat just a healthy distance.
Healthy distance, because if people are skeptical, I mean, it's just strange, you're only inquiring, how you going, how's your weekend? And I mean, it's just casual chit-chat, right? It's that casual chit-chat is kind of, in some sense, can be frivolous and stupid at times, but in some sense, keeps the bond between two people, because it's a slight gesture to show that you care. You wanted them to have a good weekend, you wanted them to be happy, and so forth and so on. But now people just don't even talk to each other. They're just whatever, man. Don't talk to me. I've got people to argue with on Facebook over here, so
true.
So. And so this is all important for friendship first, right? And we got to really hone in on that, particularly in the West, if we're going to live in a sane and healthy world.
And I think it's very urgent issue that people need to wake up and try to solve, I think. Yeah. Because the world is becoming quite insane in a very fast speed, I think.
And I'd say to people who are listening and watching is that instead of wielding your opinion, right, do this, just try this a few times. Instead of when you see something, instead of getting emotionally reactive or wielding your opinion, is listen to the consensus on an issue, for example, and feel out what is good for social harmony rather than individualistic self-interest and your own self-interest. Feel out what is best for social cohesion.
Yeah, just try to bring out some more mature element within yourself.
Exactly.
We all have it.
Exactly.
We all have it.
Don't go around virtue signaling and trying to be politically correct. Just listen to what the consensus is saying and see what is good for social harmony. You can't make everybody happy. This is a stupid Western perspective. They have this perspective where you can make everybody happy. You can't. It cannot be done because people think differently.
Exactly.
And see, in the East, there's the acknowledgement that people think differently, and I'm secure enough in that understanding. And I will allow people to live their own lives according to how they want to live.
That's why the community is in real sense.
Yes.
Understanding one another, the difference.
Yes.
And they are living with it, but they respect each other upon it.
100%. 100%. So in doing that, try to keep your mind clear and keep your mouth shut instead of wielding your opinion. Keep your mind completely clear and keep your mouth shut. Yeah. Because then, that's when we can listen to what the world wants or what the world needs.
Yes.
Yeah,
again, that practicing silence within yourself.
Yep. You've become in practicing that. you become a selfless friend to the entire world. The world doesn't need no more self-interested friends.
No.
It's-
Tired. Too tired.
And actually, the greatest friend is a selfless friend. It's the one who can listen. It's
Yes.
the one who sympathizes with the situation and operates from friendship first. Doesn't operate from opinion first, which is where all disagreement and problems and conflict arise from. So I hope all of you guys can apply this friendship first philosophy. This is a very important podcast. We hope you can share it around, and we'll see you guys next time.